Hello, friends. I've been speaking a little bit about the 8 meannesses of the heart that Sri Yukteswar talks about in his book, The Holy Science. And these 8 meannesses cloud the heart's natural love and keep us from being able to see the real nature of this world. We often talk about in meditation that the mind is like a lake with the full moon on a cloudless night. And if the wind is ruffling that lake so that the moon is reflected in a million fragments, we can't tell what the moon looks like. But if we calm the wind of restlessness in our minds, then we see the moon clearly reflected. And that's realization of what God is in our souls if we can meditate calmly with stillness. And so that's what we're trying to do with eradicating these 8 meannesses from our hearts. We're trying to free ourselves so that we can understand and realize the true nature of ourselves and this world around us, that God is in everything. And so today, I want to talk again about grief. Grief is the hardest one of the 8 meannesses for me to accept. I've said before that I thought Sri Yukteswar should have used anger, since that's such a difficult and problematic thing to work with in our lives. But I'm trusting Sri Yukteswar, and I'm trying to understand why grief is there. And I think it's because it's very difficult to rise above that grief and depression in times of great loss. The loss of family, the loss of dear friends. It's extremely difficult and painful. Which means that we have to get to that point in ourselves where we trust God more than the human pain is in our consciousness. So we have to rise above that human pain. It's similar to a story that I love about a great saint, a Sufi saint named Rabia. And Rabia was on her deathbed, and some of her disciples came to say goodbye to her and to try to ease her pain and comfort her. And one of them said, because she was in great suffering, and one of them said to her, "Mother, he is no true lover of God who isn't willing to suffer for God's sake." In other words, whatever God wills, that devotee is willing to endure. And Rabia said, this smacks of ego. And so another disciple said, "Well, Mother, he is no true lover of God who isn't happy to suffer for the Lord's sake." And she said, "No, more than this is needed." And so they urged her, "Mother, you tell us, who is a true lover of God?" And she said, "He is a true lover of God who forgets his suffering and contemplation of the divine. So when we think of our own suffering, we have to forget it in contemplation of the bliss of God. If we are feeling that bliss, we don't remember, we don't notice the trials of the body. It's not important. It's not even on our radar screen. And so when we are so in love with God, so in the bliss of spirit, we can rise above this ordinary human consciousness so that loss or gain, we are even-minded. We are in that bliss. It's still very difficult. I remember many years ago, my father passed away over 30 years ago. But at the time, my mother and I were both in the hospital. She had her Bible, and I had my Bhagavad Gita. And we were both just reading and reading again and over and over and over, finding comfort in the scriptures. And this is the passage from the Bhagavad Gita that I will read for you now, that comforted my heart when nothing else, no one else could comfort me. And I hope that as we all have to deal with the loss of dear ones at one point or another in our lives, this is very, very helpful and can be a source of inspiration and aspiration for the kind of consciousness that we are striving for. And it's in this way that the scriptures come true. The Bhagavad Gita says that yoga is the pain-free state. And I know that really inspired me as a young person. I thought, that's what I want. I want the pain-free state. But there's a lot of work involved. It doesn't just happen automatically. We have to work at it. And the way that we work at it is through meditation, through leaving this body consciousness behind, through the stillness of spirit, starting to identify more and more with our soul nature, not with this passing body that's going to be gone in a few decades. It just doesn't last that long. Not that we would even want it to. It's a temporary, as this passage says, set of clothing. And we want to go on to new styles until we don't need a body at all anymore, or just a body of light, an ideational body, and then just one with God. So we do have to work at the pain-free state, but we will get there. This is from chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, verses 17 through 30. That one, capital One, that one who pervades all things is imperishable. Nothing is powerful enough to destroy this unchangeable spirit. So here Krishna is talking about the soul nature, not this body which comes and goes, but what is behind this body, what is animating this body, and that's God, that's the soul. This capital S self, this soul self, is never born, nor does it ever perish. Existing once, it does not cease to be born again, So here Krishna is saying that soul nature is ever the same. It doesn't change. It doesn't go through the agonies of birth, the agonies of death. It doesn't go through any of that. It's imperishable. It's beyond this body. It's not touched by this body. We are a soul having a human experience. It's like the soul went to the movies and is having this experience. But just as we can get caught up and emotionally involved in a movie, so we are in this world. And going back to that soul nature is what we're striving for. The soul is birthless, eternal, changeless, ever itself. It is not slain when the body is killed. So that's an incredibly comforting thought, that even if we lose loved ones, their soul is untouched. It's never killed when the body is slain. Just as an individual forsaking dilapidated clothing dons new clothing, so also the body-encased soul, relinquishing a decayed bodily habitation, enters into other new ones. This soul cannot be severed by weapons. This soul the fires cannot burn. This soul cannot be moistened by waters. It cannot be dried up by breezes. It's ever untouched. We go through all sorts of experiences, sensory experiences, but our soul nature is ever untouched. It's like it's standing behind us, loving and protecting and being a guide for us, but it's untouched. It's just this body that goes through these things. Our immortal soul is never touched. This soul is everlasting, all-permeating, ever calm, immovable, and eternal. That's who we really are. This is just a hologram filled with light, animated by God's light. It's just an experience. The soul is imponderably unmanifested and cannot be changed. Therefore, you should not lament, knowing that this is so. But if you consider this soul incessantly to be born and to die, even if that is so, you should not grieve for it. For that which is born must die, and that which is dead must be born again. So Krishna is saying that it is the nature of this world to have the cycle of life and death. Everything in this world, anything that's born must die, and everything that's dead must be born again. So it reminds me of the story of Yudhisthira, who had to solve a riddle that he was asked by, I forget who exactly, but the riddle was, what is the most amazing thing in this world? And Yudhisthira answered him correctly by saying, the most amazing thing in the world is that man is continuously surrounded by death, and yet he thinks it will never happen to him. And so that is what this Gita passage also is saying. Why lament for these things? Because everything that is born must die, and everything that is dead must be born again. We think because we're conscious and because we are so aware right now that how could that cease? How could that awareness end? How could I die? And yet, evidence is everywhere around us that someday we will pass from this world. I read an interesting passage recently in a book that I can only paraphrase, but the author was saying, we die thousands and thousands and thousands of times. We just walk out of our bodies. There's no pain. The pain is in this world. But when we're through with this world, we're free. And when we learn our lessons, we will get to the point where we won't have to come back to this world of suffering and sorrow. Krishna says, get away from my ocean of suffering and sorrow. And eventually we will. And as the Bible says, our Father will make us a pillar in his house, and we will go no more out. We will be one with God and free from all the delusion of this world. If you consider the soul to be subject to inevitable births and deaths, then why should you grieve about something which is unavoidable? From this, we have to strengthen our resolve. And it's not easy to do. It's very difficult. Even great saints and masters have that moment of being very stern and very sober, thinking about passing from this world. It's not an easy thing. But again, great masters stiffen their will, and through Kriya Yoga, in the case of our path, and sit to meditate and consciously leave their bodies. We have, I say, even though he passed away, I'm sure he's still our dear friend. His name was Mr. Bij, and he lived in India when we were there many years ago. And we were not there during his passing, but we heard about his passing. And he was in his 80s. He had lost his wife many years before. He was ready to go. He was such a dear and loving, humble man. But he contracted a slight fever, which normally he would have recovered from. But at a certain point, he felt that his time had come. And so he called his children over and he said, I'm about to leave my body. And so he was lying on his bed and he said, now I can feel the energy leaving my feet and my legs. And they touched his feet and they were very cold. The energy had left. And he said, now it's coming up through my torso and the energy is leaving my hands and my arms. And they touched his hand and his hands were cold. And as it got up close to his chest, he said, now the energy is leaving my heart, and when it leaves my throat, I won't be able to speak anymore. But if you touch the top of my head, you'll see that the energy will be going out the top of my head. And they felt his chest and they felt that it was cold, and he closed his eyes and left his body out the top of his head. consciously relinquishing this world and his body. That's through the practice of Kriya. And let us strive to imitate that beautiful way of passing from this world. So why grieve for something that is unavoidable? Let's just try to do it in the best possible way. The beginning and end of all creatures are not unveiled. Only the middle part of existence is manifested. So this is so obvious, and yet how few times we contemplate this reality, that we don't know what happened before we were born, and we don't know what happens after we pass away. But only this middle existence is manifested. And again, the Gita cautions us, why is this something to lament about? What can there be therein to lament about? So we don't know the beginning. We don't know the end. We only know this moment. And certainly for myself, I look past through the years and it all seems like a dream. I know I was there. I experienced it all. All those experiences are still part of me. And yet they have this dream-like quality. All we ever have is this moment. This, the indwelling spirit in the bodies of all human beings, is never destructible. Therefore, you should not lament for any departed being. Do not grieve. Oh, it's so difficult to feel that, to be able to transcend that grief. But that's what we are being called to do, to stiffen our spines while still being completely flexible in our spines, but to stiffen our will, I guess I should say, so that we value the truth, that we aspire towards the truth, that we live for that realization of the truth, that we and all those we love are not these perishable, disposable bodies, but we are, all of us, that indestructible soul. One of the things that the Buddha talked about was that we should be kind and compassionate towards all beings, because at one time or another, we've been close to everyone. So let's remember that and keep that foremost in our consciousness, to live in the right way with kindness and compassion towards everyone, because they are all our own. Everyone, all the hundreds of thousands of people who have passed away during this pandemic, they're all our own. And everyone living, all the billions of people living, they are our own also. Not just those who are close and dear to us, but every soul. And it is the destiny of every soul to pass from this world. All creatures pass from this world. But if we remember the true reality, it will ease the pain, that we will be together again, that all those that we long for, that we miss, that we cry about, that we are tortured, our hearts are broken because we miss them so much. As Sri Ramakrishna said to his wife, Sarada Devi, he said, I believe in a vision, he appeared to her after his passing. She was taking off her gold jewelry. Indian women wear a lot of gold. And as a widow, she was taking off that jewelry never to be worn again. And he appeared to her and said, don't take off your jewelry. It's only that I have passed from one room to another. And so she continued to wear her gold bangles and so on. But that's how we have to think. That's how we have to train ourselves to feel that those we love are never far from us, that they have only moved from one room to another. And let us try to connect with them on that soul level, loving them, asking them for their help, and meditating on our eternal oneness with them in God.